welcome to Astro Chats. Tonight we're going to be talking about some controversial stuff like UFO sightings, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, a recently discovered alien egg on Mars, and inaccurate or just plain bad physics in movies. Stay tuned. So, earlier this week, as the Mars Curiosity rover was rolling around the red planet, it laid its robotic eyes on a very strange sight. There was a small, dark gray object about golf ball sized with an eerily smooth surface, and at first glance, it really did look like it could be an alien egg. But if it is, then why would it just be sitting on the Martian surface? Well, of course, this finding is not an actual alien egg, but the reality is still pretty interesting. Curiosity fired its laser optics at the rock to scan and discovered that it's an iron-nickel meteorite. The space rock was smooth from its high-velocity descent onto the planet, so although it's not an alien egg, it is still an interesting bit of science on the planet that keeps on giving us surprises. So something that is especially difficult in running this show is how I have to take such huge, vast topics, ones that can often be described by hundreds and hundreds of pages of text, and distill them into short little blurbs that are easily digestible by anyone, scientist or not. The scope of this next story is huge, and trying to compress something of this magnitude was a real challenge. But hopefully with the loss of some fine details, the story still comes across as amazing as the full story is. In the news recently, within the past couple years, you might have heard the word SETI come up, and maybe heard about a bunch of scientists like Stephen Hawking and billionaires like Mark Zuckerberg who were funding some multi-billion-dollar aerospace project. SETI stands for the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and the term has existed since at least the 1960s when astronomer Frank Drake created the famous Drake equation that is supposedly able to calculate the number of intelligent civilizations in the universe that we can communicate with. In this line of inquiry into the scope of potentially intelligent life in the universe, we sparked a trend of people asking the same question: are we alone? Well, Yuri Milner, a Russian tech billionaire, and Stephen Hawking, a brilliant astrophysicist, are on a mission with the help of Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg to find out. They've announced a $100 million plan just to see if their mission plans are feasible, which sounds crazy, like $100 million just to find out if your hypothetical mission could work. Well, it turns out that their idea is ridiculous and outrageous and preposterous, but it just might work. And if it does, its implications could profoundly change the way our species views the universe and ourselves. So their research program, named Starshot, has the goal of reaching the Alpha Centauri system in only 20 years. Even though Alpha Centauri is the nearest star system, while traveling at the speed of light, so at light speed, it would still take you 4 years to reach it. So what their plan proposes is that they should send a spacecraft traveling at 20% the speed of light, faster than anything that's ever been built by mankind to date, to take pictures and collect data from the stellar system that could be transmitted back to Earth in less than 5 years after reaching the star. How is this possible? So, to propel the spacecraft, the idea of a solar sail is the only thing we know that could get something traveling at such high speeds when pushed by an extremely powerful laser beam. But for a spacecraft with a solar sail measuring about 1 kilometer wide, the amount of energy needed to propel the sail to the necessary speeds would rival all energy that exists on Earth. So instead, for this project to be successful, the spacecraft and sail would have to weigh almost nothing. We're talking a few grams. Milner claims that if we can't go down to a few grams, there is no conversation. Somehow they have to work out a way to get a sail that's about 1 meter wide and all the necessary photography and transmission equipment down to a few grams. To stick to this goal weight, they'd have to slim the technology to maybe a few hundred atoms thick. And the laser that's supposed to propel this tiny spacecraft would need to be situated in a high and dry place on the Earth, preferably in the Atacama Desert in Chile, where we already have some observatories, so that's not too much of a stretch. But the solar power necessary to operate this laser would require tens of miles of solar panels and a battery powerful enough to store energy for daily operation of this laser, if Milner plans to launch one of these spacecraft every day, which he does. The spacecraft would be launched into orbit in some sort of Mothership, where one little spacecraft, which Milner hopes would cost around as much as an iPhone to produce, could be sent out and hit by the laser every day. And hundreds of probes are necessary for this mission, as any encounter of the thinly filmed sail with interstellar dust between stars would destroy the spacecraft traveling at cosmic speeds. Milner says his team has looked into 20 challenges that engineers will face, and as they tried to design the mission. He wants the final flight-ready mission to be in the price range of other hugely complex scientific missions, like CERN's Large Hadron Collider or the James Webb Space Telescope. Milner says that's what this $100 million is for, is to do extensive research into all of these challenges and to try to convince ourselves that this is possible in the lifetime of a single generation. We live in such an exhilarating time. I may be able to show my children someday photographs of planets around other stars with high enough resolution to make out their major land masses. We could essentially map exosolar worlds within our own galaxy. Interstellar travel may not be feasible for humans yet, but maybe soon for tiny robots. Okay, so now I'm going to share some examples of bad physics in movies, throwback edition. So lately in sci-fi movies, they have generally done a pretty good job at trying to keep the physics realistic. But back in the early 2000s, or even before that, dedicated physicists were often found cringing at the inaccuracies in these films. So, number 1, sounds in space. If you ever heard or seen the original Star Trek TV series, you might remember the familiar whoosh and the rumble of the Starship Enterprise as it zooms past the camera. A physicist realizes how unrealistic this is, as there is no propagation of sound waves in space, where there is no air. It's rumored that the original creator of Star Trek wanted the Enterprise to move silently through space, but producers pressured him to add the familiar sounds the audience would recognize. So maybe Gene Roddenberry was a fan of physics after all. Number 2, dense asteroid fields. Have you ever seen scenes in countless movies and TV shows where a ship is bobbing and weaving through a field of asteroids, narrowly avoiding impact and disaster? As cool as these scenes are, the reality is that the majority of at least our asteroid belt is comprised of empty space, with very few small objects between. The largest 4 objects, Ceres, Pallas, Juno, and Vesta, are the main planetary-sized objects, with Ceres being the only one out of them to be spherical and classified as a dwarf planet. Most of the objects in the asteroid belt are not so intimidating, most being under 1 kilometer in diameter. And these asteroid scenes usually have the big space rocks tumbling through space randomly, which is also clearly an inaccurate representation. The asteroid belt is fairly calm, like a lake on a clear, windless day. It's not a chaotic band of boulders soaring and tumbling through space. Number 3, steering in space. Have you ever seen the captain of a spaceship have a joystick or a wheel of some kind to propel the ship like an airplane pilot back on Earth? Well, like we've already said, there is no air in space, so there's no way tilting the wings of your spaceship affects your trajectory. Instead, spacecraft have to fire rockets or boosters in the opposite direction of the turn. Rest assured, pilot licenses will not be directly transferable to spacecraft piloting in this future of space travel. Which brings us to number 4, dodging laser beams. Here's a good one. Starships are engaged in a heated battle where dashed red and blue lines of lasers fly across the screen towards each other at each end of the field. While this makes an epic battle scene, if these were real lasers, then you wouldn't be able to see them coming towards you at all. They travel at the speed of light, so under such short distances, boom, your ship's gone. Which brings us to number 5, explosions in space. A lot of the most extreme explosions we know on Earth are accompanied by a cloud of heated air rising rapidly, followed by a shock wave which eventually hits you. But what do you do in space where there is no atmosphere for the shock wave to travel through? If you've ever seen Interstellar, the explosion of one of those ships is very accurate. There is no continual burning force of the explosion, so once the initial forces are gone, the debris are cast out in a sphere around the point of the explosion. From there, the debris fly outwards into space indefinitely until some gravitational influence affects them, or until they crash into something. And number 6, precious water. Old sci-fi movies and shows sometimes showed alien species who were obsessed with precious water that exists on Earth, flying in and wreaking havoc to take the water in its perpetually inconvenient liquid state. But water itself is not a rare resource, even on a galactic scale. It's not like we're talking about francium or cerium or any of the other many elements that have only been created in laboratories here on Earth. Water is quite abundant in the solar system, most commonly in its solid ice form. If the aliens really wanted water, they could surely go to Ganymede or Europa or Enceladus or any of the other number of moons with an abundance of either liquid or ice water, without the conflict of humans standing in the way of such a precious resource. Okay, finally, for our last story of the night, we're going to talk about a huge source of controversy and conspiracy amongst the general public, UFO sightings. I'm sure at this point all of us have seen TV shows dedicated to shedding light on the strange and unexplainable phenomena dubbed as unidentified flying objects, presumably with little green men piloting them, and first-hand accounts or sightings, or even better, abductions. First, I'd like to apologize for my scrutinizing tone for this story, as I try to keep this show as unbiased as possible, but I can't say that I agree with these UFO conspiracies or most conspiracies in general. I am a skeptic to the core. I question everything presented to me as fact. I doubt the validity of unspecified sources. I need solid evidence to support a claim. So UFO sightings can bring a lot of angst to my mind, so I'll try to keep my argument brief and uninsulting. So consider, dear believer, who perhaps one night when driving home noticed a glowing light in the sky that appeared to follow you through the trees. What could cause such a spectacle? Well, did you know that the planet Venus is often mistakenly reported to authorities as a possible UFO? It sounds silly, but really it's quite a forgivable mistake for someone who is unfamiliar with the sky. Venus is one of the brightest objects in the night sky, outshining most stars by several orders of magnitude. Therefore, it's often mistaken for a plane or a UFO by those who cannot recognize the planet at a glance. I believe that UFO sightings like these are all in the eye and mind of the beholder. Your brain wants to make some interpretation of what it sees, and based on all the science fiction you've been exposed to, it jumps to an extraterrestrial conclusion. However, most eyewitness accounts can be explained by airplanes, a herd of geese flying through the sky and reflecting city lights, or any number of Earth-restricted phenomena. When it comes to hard video evidence, it's always shaky, blurry, or out of focus. That, to me, is not hard evidence. With today's technology, it's not hard to fake a UFO hoax for views online. While it's a fun way to freak your friends out on a Saturday night, learn to take every bit of these accounts with a grain of salt, or maybe the whole salt shaker. Although these conspiracies have always fascinated me, the way the human mind can fabricate such imaginative explanations for seemingly simple phenomena is astounding, really. I don't blame anyone who's ever spotted something strange in the sky and said, "What is that? Could that be an alien spaceship?" As it is the same line of thought that leads to a future astronomer who instead would look to the sky with wonder and say, "I don't recognize this thing. What plausible explanation could there be for it?" And perhaps that little scientist would look into his books or the internet of infinite knowledge and discover that it was in fact a spaceship, the greatest ever built by humanity to house humans in space, the International Space Station. The sense of wonder and the chills and satisfaction of discovery is what drives the astronomer to keep chasing answers and answering important questions. So, whether or not you believe in the existence of real alien UFOs, keep looking to the sky. You'll never know what you discover. This has been Astro Chats. Thanks for listening.